Coffee, decaf. All right, I'm lying. It's half calf, but it's still a little bit better. Hey, everyone. Tuesday night special edition of the BAC Story. We're still on for Thursdays like we are, but I talked to my guest and I said, we got to get you on, and schedule just worked out. So I'm glad to have him here, but I'm glad you're all here, and we're going to have a very interesting conversation. I'm going to bring Mac in just a second. But Michael is one that I met through doing this show. In fact, I'll let him introduce himself as far as what all he does with trauma. But when I met him, I went through his course, and it was literally life-changing. My trauma, and Mac knows this, but my trauma is back page news. Well, you know what? I'm just going to bring him in first and bring him in here. So, Mac, it is so good to have you on here. So
one of my favorite pupils.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's because look, you have, if you're going to bring up the trauma of being left on the dance floor, my junior year.
Oh, I'd forgotten about it.
Yeah, I haven't. She was beautiful. I got the guts to ask her to dance. I'm out there boogieing like a complete, dork. I turned to make eyes with my buddies to show, hey, look who I'm dancing with. And I can't turn back around, and she was gone. And I sat there and danced like an idiot by myself, waiting for her to come back, which she never did. So then I had to just bebop my way through the crowd, straight to the door, and leave. So there was my trauma. But
there's a life lesson in there too.
Oh, that's incredible. Well,
when you're dancing with her, pay attention to her.
Don't take your eyes off her ever. I will
ever.
I don't know if it's going to be in this life or the afterlife, but I will meet her, whoever she is. I don't even know who it is, but I was say, was it really that bad? Was it that painful?
Well, you don't know her name. You don't know her name. Have you blocked her name out?
A different school, and I asked her, and she was she couldn't even dance one lousy song with me. So, but you know what? We're joking. Oh no, there's actually no.
She gave you a shot, and then you turn and goof off with your friends.
No, not at all.
She could see.
She was
the writing on the wall. She knew the future when you did that.
I sat out there dancing by myself, like even more of a dork than I already was.
No, I will say this about Jeff, and I am no stranger to abusing Jeff for the things that he says.
Welcome to the crowd.
But I often, when I go speak and I talk about my life, and somebody will stand up and say, thank you for being so vulnerable in front of all of us, and I kind of cringe at that. Like, I don't want to be that guy, right? Am I that guy now? And I thought about it, and I don't think when you stand up and you share your life with people, I don't think that's, and I say this knowing that everybody who's joined us tonight lives a little part of that. Like, how much do I tell them my story? How much of the truth is should I share? And I think it's an act of courage to talk about the things that we don't really want to talk about. And
well, I'll tell you,
and just shut up for a second. So Jeff comes to this thing that I do called post-traumatic winning, and a seminar that Peggy Cooney,
love her,
and Susan Keeley, right? They told me that I needed to do this in a seminar format, and I said, I don't know how to do that. And they said, well, we do. I said, well, if you guys will organize it, I'll do the content. And so that's what happened. So I talk about my life, right? And my parents divorced, and they never spoke again, starting from the time that I was about 18, 19. So they annihilated our family to the point where my dad died 2 years ago, and I didn't go to his funeral. I joined the Marine Corps. We shoot a guy in training, right, who was 2 feet from a machine gun, and I was at the machine gun, and I found out what it was like when somebody really gets shot, and it's not like in the movies. A helicopter crashes where I'm training 3 years later, 3 years, probably 7 years later. And the pilot's decapitated, co-pilot crushed to death. And we're trying to save the 2 Marines in BAC, and they both die. My sister's husband murders her 2 kids, 6 years old, 4 years old, 3 years later in 1996. And I have 3 combat deployments, twice to Iraq, once to Afghanistan. And then one of my 2 younger sisters freezes to death in 2014 in Indianapolis as a result of alcohol poisoning. So my family's no stranger to this fight with this thing you guys wrestle with, and cold weather. And so I tell my story, and how, I've been interviewing people about terror, how it, trauma, how it impacts your life, how we use alcohol to numb ourselves. So Jeff joins this, right? And he's a bit neurotic, right?
Thanks.
About his life. But what he's struggling with is, and he constantly said it, I feel like a loser because my trauma is not cool like Max. And I will tell you this, and the courage that he showed in not being afraid, and I hate to give him compliments in public, but I've thought about this, and I will, because it's the truth. I only do the truth. If you're looking for somebody to sugarcoat something, then you brought the wrong person on. But he was willing to talk about the dance event. He was willing to talk about being terrified to drive over bridges. He was willing to talk about these things that were paralyzing to him, that were not like cool masculine things, right? Like Matt can point to and say, yeah, and everybody would say, yeah, that is traumatic. That is, how do you deal with it? His were not that way. And by doing that, he served as an inspiration to a lot of people who I know felt the same way. Because the seminar is not about combat. The worst thing I've ever seen happened to my sister, right, in Sacramento, California, where Jeff and I grew up. And so when it comes to life, right, Jeff's been a great example in the world that I deal with, of that trauma is trauma, right? And we always want to compare it. And I tell everybody that comparison is irrelevant. The delivery mechanism that trauma comes into our life via is different for all of us, but the impact on us is the same. And he was a great and courageous ambassador to, I'm kind of making jokes about this, but it wasn't anything to joke about. I couldn't drive over a bridge. Right. I couldn't do my job. And in order to get through my days, I resorted to numbing myself with alcohol. And so, there's a compliment, and it's not, but again, I say that because, it inspired other people to not be afraid to tell the truth about themselves. And that's a huge step.
The point you made, and we joke about this dance thing, which is 100% true. But that shook me. That messed with some of my confidence. That altered how I approached life. My point is, when everyone's going around the room talking about their trauma, and you're saying these, the battle stuff, I'm not going to share something simple, because it's like, are you kidding me? Really? That's your trauma? It's almost embarrassing. So you know what I do? I hold it in. And even though it's trauma is trauma, it's not one, because it's not glory and, rescuing someone out of a fire, that I was traumatized from that, where you get, this is embarrassing stuff. I keep it in. And that's why I'm so glad you're here. And I want to just kind of start from the beginning and just talk about trauma and take people through what you do, how you do it, what people can expect. I know you've got some courses coming up, and I'd strongly recommend anyone that's interested. But I really thought I was the only one. I didn't realize that we all do have stuff, and that those courses were unbelievable. So anyways, start from the beginning. I know you and I touted this. You do a lot of work with the military. You work with suicide prevention, trauma, post-traumatic, all those things. but how did you get into the civilian part of this? And what, just start your framework. I want to hear what's going on. Go ahead.
After my combat deployments, I retired out of the military, and we were having such a tough time with suicide. We have had 7,000 American service members plus killed in combat. And that's all things. Vehicle rollovers, got electrocuted on the base, gunshot wounds, IEDs, all that. In the same period of time, post 9/11, we've had over 30,000 suicides. We have 4.5 times as much suicide as we have killed in combat. And you experience that, you go through it, and you what is going on with us? Like, how can we survive these difficult things? We come back home to our families, and then we kill ourselves. And so my podcast, I didn't tell anybody because nobody listens to mental health radio, right? I mean, it's not something you hear like, hey, yeah, I'm going to go listen to mental health radio. And Marines in particular would not. But because they're Marines, you could trick them. So that's what I did. I would say, we're going to talk about this, Battle of Fallujah or something like this with Sergeant Graham, who was there at the time. And then about 2/3 of the way through the interview, I'd say, okay, Jeff, well, what happened when you came home? And they would tell me a story that would be jaw-dropping about how their life fell apart. They got drunk for years. Marriage ended. Got married a second time. Second marriage ended. Right. Wound up with a gun in my mouth. Didn't pull the trigger. And one of the most interesting parts of it was a lot of the narrative of the story had nothing to do with their time deployed in combat. It had to do with childhood experiences. It had to do with relationships. And so I did that for 2 years, and I learned so much. And again, remember, I have bifocals when it comes to trauma, right? Like, I've been to war for almost 3 years of my life for this country. The worst thing I've ever seen happened in our hometown. Nothing to do with combat whatsoever. So my bias was, and I know there's people listening and watching to this tonight who've been abused as children. They've been raped, right? And they haven't told anybody because they don't talk about it, right? And so that's what I used to hear from people. And then a friend of mine took over a unit that's 18,000 Marines and sailors on the East Coast. And he said they had 6 suicides in 5 months. And he said, would you come do that thing you're working on? And I said, I'd love to. From the very first day I did it, it exploded. It was just incredible, the reaction people had. When you look at people and you tell them the truth, and Jeff's heard these things, but when you look at them and say, you're never going to get over the things that traumatize you ever. And if you struggle with them, guess what that makes you? Normal. Nothing's wrong with you. Okay. There's a path through there. I can show you that path and you can do it. I promise you. Right. I promise you. And then is with a caveat, as long as you don't have a serious mental illness, as long as you're not bipolar, schizophrenic, personality disorder, clinical diagnosed severe depression. If you have those, then I don't do mental health. I do everything short of that line, which I call mental fitness. And so it explodes. I do that. And so then that organization, 18,000 Marines and sailors, 6 suicides in 5 months. They have 1 suicide in the next 11.5 months, and nobody can believe it. And so that opens up other doors. So my bias is not in the military, but that's where I started doing this, right? That's where the first audience was. And then Peggy and Susan contacted me, and they were adamant that you got to do this. And, and Susan introduces me to Peggy. Peggy has been in social work for 25 years. And she says, I've never seen something so true, so raw, and so upbeat and positive. You've got to do this for a larger audience. I said, okay. And that's when they put together the first seminars. And I think you were part of the second one. Mm-hmm. And so that's really been the pattern. And so a lot of the first people that were in the first 2 seminars came from Sober Sisters, and it was a lot of alcohol related groups that initially gravitated to it. What was interesting about them was I heard over and over, I've talked about drinking and my struggle, to not drink. And I've never really looked into why I drink, and you're making me go there. And so I think what I discovered, as a lot of people did, was, unless you are willing to go there, right? You're 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 dealing with the symptoms. What are the causal factors? And I go back to, the suicide that I heard of. You know, yeah, he was in Iraq or Afghanistan, and yeah, he killed himself. And everybody's going to say, "Oh, it's because of the war." No, he got raped when he was 7 years old by his uncle. That's why it just took 20 more years for him to finally. And if you look at traumatic events as another weight plate stacked on somebody, you have infrastructure damage when you're 7 years old. You don't talk about it, you hide it, you fake it. And Jeff's given a version of it. He wouldn't, not going to talk about the girl walking away, not going to talk, a big guy like him can't drive across a bridge, right? Which means he's going to lose his job. He's not going to talk about that in public. And so we do that with things. Sexual violence, child abuse, things that happen way earlier in life that cause really deep, deep damage. And so that's what I found. And so the seminars have been wonderful because, I just spoke at the Naval Academy for 2 days. And I mean, it's just unbelievable experiences. But the seminars I love so much because they're a discussion. The thing that I do is 5 pieces, and each is about an hour. The first one's longer, but and then we get together and we talk about them. And the discussions are awesome. They're amazing, and they've really, really changed the way some of the content that I do. It's added content because of things people have said to me. Maybe the way they've articulated a point that makes it much, much better than I could ever articulate it. And so it's been, and so that's how it got to the civilian side. And I think it is the optimum way to deliver the product is online. So you sit and watch it, these videos, and you take notes, and then we get together, we talk about them, and the discussions will blow you away. Absolutely. Blow you away. At first everybody's a little bit nervous to talk, and then all of a sudden people find they're in the company of other people that are just like themselves, and they begin to relax, and then all of a sudden they say, "Yeah, my husband, used to put a gun in my mouth and tell me he was going to blow my fucking brains out." And the night Duran said that, I'll never forget it. The night Gretchen talks about, getting pregnant when she was a sophomore in high school. Her parents embarrassed, send her away. She has the baby. And I asked her one night, she was telling a bit of the story, and I don't pry into people's stories, right? But I said, "Gretchen, did you ever get to hold your daughter?" Now, Gretchen's in her late 60s. She looked up at me and she said, "You're the first person that's ever asked me that." And then I asked her, "So when you had the baby, you went home and you went back to biology class and prom dresses?" She said, "Yeah, we never talked about it." And I just covered my face and I was like, "You gotta be kidding me. You gotta be kidding me. You think combat's harder than that? You're crazy." And then, the woman who was brought to me by one of the women in Sober Sisters, her name's Gail. She talked about
being back your camera a little bit so we can see you. Yeah, there you go.
I got to move my seat.
Good.
So Gail talked about being sexually abused starting at the age of 5 in her own home. And she tells this story, and she's a very successful person. But she said, I was horrible on the inside until this. And for the first time in my life, I see the world in color. And I've never seen it like this before. And you sit there and you watch this, but it's in the company of people like them. It's not being afraid to talk about your shit, right? And knowing that you won't be judged and that everything you're going to hear is going to be true. Nobody's going to tell you time heals all wounds, because it doesn't. Nobody's going to tell you there's a purpose in this, because there's not. Those are things our parents say at funerals because they didn't know what the hell to say, right? And they heard their parents say it, so we regurgitate that. I don't say those things because they're not true. And so it's just been, mean, honestly, I have to pinch myself sometimes because of the miracles that I see. People that have no business saying, my life has gone from trauma to joy, and I cannot believe it. I cannot believe what my life has become, and I never thought it would be like this. And they honestly, if you heard their stories, you would say, yeah, you don't have any business living like that.
Well, I'll just ask you this question. What are we doing wrong? Because there's therapists on every corner. You know, why is this such a problem? What are we doing wrong, and what are you doing different?
I'm had two. We have a graduate seminar. In the last 2 weeks, we talked about that specific issue. Why do I have people that come to the seminar and say, I've been in therapy for 30 years. I made more progress here in 3 weeks than I have in 30 years. I don't know. And I'd be curious about what your audience thinks. All right. Is it liability? Right? Is it, if I tell you, Jeff, that there's really nothing wrong with you and you and I are going to be friends maybe for 8 weeks, and then you're not going to need me anymore. You could still come and see me if your insurance company will pay for it, or if you want to. I'm okay with that. But you're not going to need to see me. Right? So is it a business model that says my first goal is to gain and retain you as a client? So because it is a business, yes. And so we had a vote last night. And the number one thing they said was, A, it's a business. I want to grow my client base and I want to retain my client base. B, it's a liability thing. I'm not really sure what I could say, because what I hear all the time is you tell us to do things and you're adamant about it. You've got to do this. If you won't do this, we can sit and talk about your shit for forever. It's not going to change anything. So you've got to do this stuff. And no therapist ever looked at me and said that. And I don't understand it, because I look at what I do as life-saving. And I learned first aid, right? Restore the breathing, stop the bleeding, treat for shock. Okay. So the first thing I do is I look at you to find out if you have a serious mental illness. If you do, I can't help you. I have to stay in my lane, and I do. Second, right? So that's restore the breathing. That's step one. Step two, right? I have to tell you that there is a path for you. And I have to introduce you to all these people that have gone down it, people that have been raped, people that have had family members commit suicide, people that have been abused as children. I want to show you all these people that have walked this same path. And if they can do it, you can do it. And that lights this little flame of hope. Okay. That maybe this guy's not really full of shit. Maybe there is truth, because he's telling me these things that these people like Elizabeth Smart, right? And all these people that have gone down this path, and I've heard of them, and if they can do it, I can do it. And then the next part is, give me concrete things that I can do. And with those concrete things, all of a sudden I see one area of my life. It might be finances, it might be alcohol, right? It might be physical fitness. And I'm not trying to make anybody a CrossFit athlete, but just get active, right? Get out in the sun, get out in the fresh air, get your body moving. That endorphin thing is no joke, right? And so I've seen people change their lives, but it would all start in one area. And like I said, it might be money, it might be fitness, it might be alcohol consumption, right? It might be journaling, all these different things. What about that is going to get anybody sued? I don't know, Jeff. For the life of me, I don't know, because I will tell you this. We can do this. We can fix this as a culture. I'm convinced of it, because everywhere I go, the same thing happens. I'm going to tell you the truth. If you don't like it, I don't give a shit. Okay. It is what it is. And I'm going to show you a path for you. And if you'll do these things, you'll walk down that path. And so I don't know. The consensus of the group.
For me, alcohol was my coping mechanism. So whatever
one of your coping mechanisms.
So I never addressed anything, but why it worked for me when I was in your group. I go back to my anxiety, because I had crippling panic attacks and anxiety. Found out later that alcohol, I was dumping fuel on that fire. But regardless, I was in seeing my doctor, my paid doctor, great guy, and we were talking about it, and he said this. And I said, how do you buy groceries? I can't even go into a grocery store right now. And he said, well, I don't know. I've never experienced that. It's like, well, why the hell am I asking you to help me with, you don't even know what it feels like. I can't, it was like, you have no idea. So in the room with your group, with those people, and this is also in like, alcohol, working with others.
Right.
It was like, oh, you're kidding me. You too? And that just brought a calm. I'm no longer alone. I'm not the only one. There's others, and it was a safety in number. And I felt with the whole room, when I was in your thing, everyone dropped that because we were all there. It was fantastic. That was like point one. We weren't even getting the steps on what to do, but it was like, he gets it.
Well, and here's the thing is that the number one way, because traumatic things happen, right? And let's just say they happen to you when you're a child. Let's just say I lose my mother to breast cancer when I'm little. There's this thing I call your cumulative traumatic burden. And that is the weight we carry, and we don't know how to deal with it, right? So all it does is build up on it. There is no outlet for it. We just endure it. So my mom passes away. I give her a kiss. She doesn't kiss me back. I watch as the machines start beeping, and hopefully somebody takes me out of the room, right? But if they're preoccupied and don't, I sit there and watch as somebody unplugs those machines and pulls a sheet over my mother's head. My teachers, coaches, and counselors at school all are concerned about me, right? Hey, Matt, do you want to talk about it? And when I did, I cry. When I cry at school, what do other kids do? They make fun of me. And so when I'm a kid, what do I learn how to do? I learn how to fake it. Hey, Mac, you want to come talk? No, coach, I'm good. I'm going to practice. Hey, Mac, you want to come in and talk? No, sir, I'm going out to recess. And so as a little guy, we learn how to fake it because we don't want to be abused for that kind of stuff because it's too deep in us. Then when I'm a teenager, what do I discover? Pot and booze. And so the way that the people here have dealt with traumatic experiences in your life is the way the vast majority of us do it. We fake it and we numb it ourselves, right? That's the way we do it. I can tell you, Marine Corps, soaked in alcohol. It's the way we do it. And it's the way we destroy our lives.
Yeah, but I'm assuming in the military, I'm not going to cry to other. That's a total sign of weakness. I've got to.
Well, they get drunk, they cry to each other, and then we get up in the morning and we show up at work and we do our thing and we fake like we didn't do it, just like everybody else. It's no different. We're not crying about military things either. And think about this: who's leaving town at the age of 18? Looking for a job that's not going to college. You and I have been to college. You don't need to be gifted to go to college. You just have to show up sober most of the time and sit through class. You'll get through. So who's leaving town at 18 looking for something better? A lot of them have significant trauma in their life, and a lot of them head to the military, right? So you have this, and the thing is, the military doesn't survey this. They don't know this at all. So they have this group, these short haircuts, good-looking uniforms, right? Ton of trauma, and they're soaking in alcohol every night and coming to work and being functioning alcoholics, right? Waiting for the weekend. There'll be when there's a hurricane that hits on the East Coast and they shut bases down and stuff like that, the first thing that happens is the liquor store gets bought out. That's that group, and that's how they cope with it. No different than any other group of people that has a lot of that shit in their life.
And again, the military is going to get the attention, but I, as a civilian or a mom of two, whatever, I'm gonna do the exact same thing.
You're gonna do the exact same thing, but nobody's really going to study you because you're not going to come out and talk about it, right? You're just going to do it on the down low until you can't go into a store and buy food, or until you can't lose your job because you can't drive across a bridge.
How do people discover? I mean, I don't think that you're going to tell them to go looking for your trauma. But if I'm, you know, is it a positive thing to dig deep and uncover?
Yeah. Let me tell you, you know it is, okay? And Gretchen, I just told a quick the story about she gets pregnant. The way she gets pregnant is she's raped, right? And her mom didn't believe her. So anyway, so it's just so, and like I said, I don't pry into people's stories, right? I don't start digging into them. But over time, more and more layers of the story go out, and you're sitting there listening to it. Let me get in front of the camera. You're sitting here listening to it, and you're just going, "Good God, man!" Right? And so these layers pile up, and you don't know what to do with it. So what do you do with it, Jeff? And who do you go to it? If you're a mom, and this is the pressure of being a mother, I have all these beautiful children that I have, and they depend on me, right? I've gone to see a therapist, and it didn't really work out. And I left probably more frustrated than I should, and I'm not going to go through that again. And so I'm going to suck it up, do exactly what you did. You're the most normal person in the way you handled it. And where does it take you? It takes you to numbing yourself. And what was the numbing agent? Alcohol. And that's us. I don't know if I answered your question.
As corny as my stuff was, I mean, the anxiety going over bridges was that was huge. And that's not something I'm going to talk about to my buddies. But as insignificant, those things change.
Hold on. The question you asked me about digging into your trauma. So I'm sorry, Gretchen, one night, and this is, I talk about the things that I learned from people. She says, we were talking about our trauma. And so I thought I'd sit down, and I would offer this to everybody who's watching tonight. Sit down and make a list. Start at number 1 and start writing down the traumatic events of your life. And you will be aghast at how long the list is. So I always get a question. Okay, Mac, well, how does one define a traumatic event? And my answer is, if your brain is telling you this goes on the list, then it goes on the list. Whether it's going across bridges, not being able to buy groceries, girl walking off the dance floor, whatever it is, it's what it is, right? For me, it was getting sucker punched in a gym on a Saturday morning, shooting baskets with my friends. A kid did it on a dare from another kid. Just walked right up, didn't say a word, and punched me. And I didn't throw a punch. I was so stunned, and I felt like a coward, right? And that was probably when I was 11 or 12. Still to this day, right? Doesn't sit well with me. It's embarrassing to me, right? It was traumatic to me. And so whatever your brain tells you, and you'll be surprised at how long that list is, right? And so is digging into it a good thing? Absolutely. And it's not like you're ever going to get away from it. And the way the brain stores trauma, if you watch the History Channel, you see guys being interviewed that are fought in World War II, right? And they're approaching 100, most of them. They haven't seen their car keys in 20 years? They probably don't remember what county they live in. But if you ask them what they did in the Pacific or in Europe or in Africa, they'll tell you in slow motion, high definition, exactly what they did. And the same holds true for somebody who's a victim of child abuse, domestic violence, right? Sexual violence, or somebody who kissed their mother goodbye, of terminal illness, right? The brain stores that in some kind of specialized compartment that preserves it and preserves the details of it, the smells, the sounds, the feelings, all of it. And so it's not like you're going to get away from it. And so, but again, what I tell people is, even though those things have happened to you, not only can you live a good life, you can live a great life.
What happens if I don't do this? And you just said this list, and
you go down, you go down the road that Vietnam veterans went down.
Because you brought up, just talking about this, a couple of things came up that I've never told anyone that were small, but really you know, and it came when you said you got sucker punched and didn't fight back. A couple of those kind of things came in, and I just felt this rush of, oh God, I hate that. I hate that memory. You know, I wish I could. And so those come up, but if I don't address those now, I don't even think I would have remembered that had you not just brought this, you know, start going down the list or spark that. But if I don't address it, what happens? And if I do address it this way, what can I hope to expect?
Well, if I don't address it, I become you, which is, and it's what Vietnam veterans did, right? They came home and the country didn't want to deal with them. So, I mean, if you want an illustration, when you have problems and don't deal with them, their rate of suicide, drug addiction, homelessness, mental health, you know, issues, divorce, it's embarrassing. I think it's one of the most embarrassing and tragic chapters in the nation's history. But that chapter is replicated all the time by people that go through really difficult things in their life, and they look for help and they don't find it. And so what do they, and then they have children who depend on them, and they say, hey, the world's not going to stop for me and my feelings. So suck it up, buttercup, right? Have a glass of wine and cool everything out, and we'll get through the day. And then it's have another glass, and that's how pretty soon, and life doesn't stop where you were. It keeps feeding that, right? Other traumatic things happen. And so that's a lot of people. And the problem is, I think, if you go to a therapist, you know, you'll go in and you got to find somebody who I call therapy a three-legged stool. They've got to get you, you've got to get them, and then together you got to make progress. If one of the legs isn't functioning, then you got to repair it, right? You got to get a new therapist. But we don't know that. And we go to therapists and we see it as a vertical relationship, therapist to Mac. And we should look at it as their partners in this endeavor with us. It's a horizontal thing. You've got to interview that therapist. Hey, how do you do this? Will you give me rudder steer? Will you tell me what to do? Or do you just listen and kind of lead me someplace, you know, in this very Socratic way? Because I need somebody to be more probably prescriptive, to give me more. And if they say, well, I don't do it like that, then go find another one. But who coaches us on how to find a therapist? Nobody. And I think that we don't have a good experience, a lot of us. I didn't. And I like the guys that were my therapists. But my presentation total runs about 7 hours. There's nothing in there that either one of my therapists told me. And I just realized that about 7 months ago. I was like, holy shit. Why is that? Why is that? And so, so I think we go and we struggle. And then, but again, people depend on us. We're providers. We're all these things. And so we have to suck it up. And we do until we can't do it anymore. Can someone
like me, as a 58-year-old male, do I have to be a like person to where I'm going to get that level, or could I be with a different age and a different, you know, gender, and still is that bond? Is it? It can be across the board.
What you experienced, and I make this comment when people ask me, why is it effective? And I say, you know, I go to speak to audiences where I'm 20 to 30 years older than most people, right? Sometimes 40 years older than most people. Why do they feel comfortable coming up to me and say things like, I've never told anybody this in my life, but I've been sexually abused by somebody in my family, and they told me that if I ever told anybody, they would make it worse. And you're the first person I've ever told. Could I talk to you? And it crosses age boundaries. It crosses gender boundaries, right? It crosses racial boundaries, because you share this, sadly, this camaraderie in these terrible things of your life, and then all of a sudden somebody's standing up saying things that you know are true. I have this saying, and I always attribute it to Kanye West, so everybody thinks it's cool, right? The truth lands with a thud and needs no salesman. And I say, if Kanye West says that, what do we know about it? And then I say, well, Kanye West didn't really say that. I made that up and put his name on it, so you guys think it's cool. But it makes me feel good because they always think Kanye West says it, right?
I'm
And
glad
I
you
said,
clarified, because I would have been telling everyone tomorrow, hey, guess what Kanye said? Looking like
exactly. And so, but it makes me feel good. So maybe one day I'll write lyrics for Kanye
well,
West.
you know what? I'll get you after the show, but I gotta write that quote down, and I'm gonna
well, you know, but again,
I'm gonna claim credit for it.
It comes to me interviewing this guy from Vietnam talking about what it was like to fight there and then come home and live in a world of alcoholism, mental illness, and nobody cared. Nobody wanted to talk to him about it. And all he was saying was true thing after true thing after true thing. And my brain says to me, the truth lands with a thud, and it doesn't need anybody to explain it because you hear it, you know it. So when I tell people, you're never going to get over the things that traumatize you, they'll come up to me at a break and they'll have tears in their eyes and they'll say, why didn't somebody tell me that? I say, I don't know. It's the first thing I ever really learned, and it's the most fundamental thing. There's nothing wrong with you. You're not going to get over it. And when you struggle with it, just know that you're a human being. And the challenge.
I think when I first started with this course, and I want you to get into what's involved with the course. We got to get into the meat of it so people know what to expect or what's involved. But I thought it was almost like a disease that if I saw you, it was going to be cured. And that's not, that I suddenly, I don't have to look back at any that trauma. It's gone. Mac did it. It's gone. That's not the case.
Well, if you understand that the damage is forever, then what you have to understand is the remedy has to be forever, naturally, right? There's no seminar, there's no book that makes it go away, right? And then you're struggling to do that. And then somebody looks at you and says, I just wish you could be the way you used to be, right? And you're trying as hard as you can, but you can't be that person anymore because life has intervened in your life. I can't unsee it. I can't unexperience it. I can't reboot it. I can't be that person. And I heard this in a movie that interviewed women whose husbands had gone off to war. Didn't interview the guys at all, just the women. And she was having heart problems. And her husband was a Vietnam veteran, Marine, and he was a drinker and he had an anger problem. And they run all these tests, they can't find anything. And the doctor starts talking to her, and he says, well, let's talk about your husband. Does he drink? And she said, yeah. And she said, and then he said, does he have any anger problems, anxiety? And she said, anger. He said, is he a veteran? And she said, yes. And he says, Vietnam? And she said, yes. And he says, which branch of the service? And she says, Marine Corps. And he says, that's the problem. He's causing your heart issues. So he says the next time he comes, the movie's called I Married the War. You need to bring him. So the doctor explains what's going on with his wife. And he looks at her and says, I'm so sorry. He said, I have to learn to be a better version of me. And I love the way that sounds because you can't be the version of you used to be. As much as all of us might want to be that person, I can't be that person anymore. I can be a better version of me. And what post-traumatic winning is about how do you become a better version of you? What are the steps you take? What are the things you have to do, right? And how do you do that? Not only to live a good life, but to live a great life. And so, how do I become a better version of me? And so all of you that are here tonight, you're like Jeff and I, you're damaged versions of the person that you used to be. The carnage that has gone through probably your life because of your struggle with alcohol, and some of it, for some of you, you're sitting there thinking, oh my God, he's telling my story, right? That the trauma I experienced was as a child. I never really learned how to cope with it. I started drinking. And I just want you to know, right? There's a path for you. to not live a good life, to live a great life. And I can show you that path.
I'm sorry to be looking down. I'm putting this in the banner. Post-traumatic winning, Michael McNamara. How do we get more information? And then I want you to tell us what you're
posttraumaticwinning.com.
Okay.
Is the website. And there's a page that says seminars. It's a 7-week seminar, costs you $150. And you'll learn about this path that I've been talking about tonight.
Posttraumaticwinning.com.
Right.
Okay. I'm just going to scroll it. So it's a 7-week. When does it start?
Next Tuesday, Wednesday. So there's 2 different sessions. There's a Tuesday session and a Wednesday session. So if you go to the website, whoa.
How's that? Post,
whoa.
You know what? I got to add a T. I got only one T in there.
Come on, man.
You know what? You get what you paid for. Okay.
Jeff and I went to rival Catholic high schools. Obviously, mine did a better job at teaching.
You know who Christian Brothers, who was your most famous graduate? Jethro from the Beverly Hillbillies, Max Baker. I'm going back to my 40th high school reunion in a couple weekends. So,
wow.
In fact, I'm going to be out in California and in Sacramento. I want to see you. So they can get the information off that. It's a 7-week. What's involved? What do they need to bring? What can they expect?
I mean, you watch the videos and then you come and be prepared to talk. And again, if you don't want to talk, you don't have to. Nobody's going to say, all right, Jeff, How
many people are in the class?
About 30.
Okay.
30. And so if you know people, share the link with them. Because again, I've been going out and doing this presentation for it's going on 4 years. And I see miracles all the time. People who look at me and say, I'd be dead if it wasn't for you. Right. And I don't know why more therapists don't do this, but and in fact, I get when people who have been to, I just had somebody at a restaurant wait for me outside in Annapolis, Maryland. And she looks at me and she goes, can I ask you a question? She said, are you a friend of Ed? And I said, Ed who? And she goes, never mind. And is that an Alcohol Anonymous guy? Is he the guy?
No, that's Bill. Is the friend of
Bill. She said, are you a friend of Bill?
Okay, yeah. Then
right.
That's the
See, that's how fucked up I am. I don't even know the right name. And I looked at her like, what? Like, Bill who? She goes, Bill W. Right? I'm like, I don't even know what you're talking about. And she goes, there's a lot of parallels between what you do and Alcoholics Anonymous. And I said, I've heard that. I don't know what they teach. I've never been to a meeting, but I will tell you this. What you learn in post-traumatic winning is you learn the truth. There's 4 goals and 10 commandments. And I think Jeff will tell you, because part of what Jeff's doing is the 4th commandment. And that is, stick your hand out and help others. And as you help them, as you transform their life, you will transform your own life.
100%. I get more out of it than anyone I work with.
And it's that act of giving. It's that act of giving that, I tell people to kind of give you a little bit of the class. You cannot convert trauma to joy. And you'll hear that phrase. Right? The secret is you overwhelm your traumatic experiences with joyful experiences by doing what? By helping other people. And so that then becomes fuel for me to live with discipline. And what I try to get people to understand that self-discipline is truly self-love. The more discipline, but it's got to be this wisdom-based discipline. It can't just be white knuckling going, oh, I'm going to do it because that doesn't work. It has to be in your brain. This is why I'm doing it. This is where it leads me. This is the goodness that it brings me. And I don't want to go back there. And so it's that path. It's that path that you can use, and again, to help anybody, people in your family, friends, strangers, you know,
You
and
know, yeah, the one I forgot about this, but one thing I got from all of this, and it might have been one of it was a video. One of the things about or did you buy the shirt, or was that someone else that bought the shirt?
that was me.
That was you. Just give that one real quick, because I love this story.
Well, and I just saw her. I just saw this woman 2 months ago. But anyway, I had done this presentation. This is probably about 2.5 years ago now, at a Marine base in Southern California. It's 30 minutes from my house. I'm driving home. I go into Macy's looking for a shirt. Lady sees me. She says, "Can I help you?" I said, "I'm looking for this shirt." And she said, "It's over there. Do you need help?" And I said, "No, I'll find it." So I go over and I grab the shirt. I come back. She's making chit chat with me. She grabs it. She's ringing it up. She said, "Did you find what you needed?" I said, "I did. Thank you." And she said, "How's your day been?" Right. And I said, "Well, as a matter of fact, my day's been awesome." And she said, "Really?" And I said, "Yep." She said, "Why?" And I said, "Well, I do some public speaking, and I did this morning, and it was fantastic." She said, "Do you mind if I ask you what you talk about?" And I said, "No." And then I was trying to think, how do I articulate this for somebody? And I looked at her and I said, "I teach people how to turn trauma into joy." And with that, she puts the shirt down. She said, "Could you teach me?" And I looked around and said, "Lady, you better ring my shirt up, because if you don't ring it up, you're going to get fired." And she said, "No, you're a customer. It's okay. I can talk to you." And I said, "Okay, I want you to go to my website." I gave her my card. And I said, posttraumaticwinning.com. In the search box, type in winning, and you're going to see all these podcasts about post-traumatic winning. I said, "Promise me you'll listen to 3 of them." She said, "I promise." I said, "Okay." I said, "Now I'm going to give you a 2-minute class." And I did. And at the end of the class, she looks at me and she says, "I don't know why God sent you into my life today, but I needed to meet you." And I remember standing there. I mean, if you can imagine being accused of being an instrument of God in your life, thinking, "God, I wish my mother could be here," right? All those times my mom thought I was such a piece of shit, right? Why can't she be standing next to me when something like this happens? And my mom's passed away. I know she watches, and I thought about this as I got up to speak from the stage that Maya Angelou has spoken from at the Naval Academy, this, hollowed, hall. I mean, how much my mother would love this. And but this woman who I didn't know, but from buying a shirt, all of a sudden looks at me and says, "Thank you." I see her 2 or 3 months ago, and I hadn't seen her since. So I thought she wasn't at Macy's, because whenever I went there, I never saw her. And all of a sudden, I look up. My daughter Colleen's with me, and I said, "Oh my God, Colleen, there she is." And I had my mask on, and I take my mask off, and I walk over, and I said, "I'm not sure if you remember me." And she looked at me and she said, "How could I ever forget you?" And I looked at her and said, "I tell your story every time I do my presentation. I tell everybody about when I met you." And she looked at me and she said, "I went to your website. I listened. I try to help as many people as I can." She said, "Thank you." And so I will tell you that you don't have to get up on a stage and do it, right? It's sticking your hand into what I call the valley of the shadow of death. I did not make that up, right? That came from the Old Testament, right? David, right? Psalm 23,
Oh,
verse
Kanye.
4, right? Um, and you don't have to be all the way out of the valley to stick your hand back in to help somebody. If you're 3 steps out of the river that's at the bottom of so the valley of the shadow of death is formed by a river, right? He doesn't really go into this in the Psalm, right? But I've thought about it. It's called the valley of the shadow of death river, of course. So if you're 4 steps out of it and somebody's in it, you can stick your hand and say, "Hey, I'm not great at this yet, but I'm trying and it makes sense to me. And I'd like you to come with me." Right? Do you remember what it was like when you didn't know shit? Right? And how dark that world is? And all of a sudden you're going to be one of the people that lights a Bic lighter in that room, the first light. And so you don't have to be perfect at it. You have to be fighting up the hill to get out, and be willing to talk and learn, and you'll get there. You'll get there. And like I said, I see it all the time. And I would tell you probably 75, 80, 90% of the people, alcohol is a huge part of that climb out of the valley of the shadow of death. And so you can get there. I know, I see it all the time.
The thing I got from that story, and I try to ask the question twice, because I say, hey, how you doing? And what's the first answer you always get?
Oh, I'm good, thanks.
Fine, good. And then I say, and this came from you and from that story, I say, no, really, how are you doing? And even if you don't get an open up, it's a pause. They hear the question and they'll think. And if they say, you know what, I'm doing great, boom, then good. But at least the second time, no, really, how are you doing?
Well, and especially one of the commandments is, right, with your friends, don't fake it, right? And so when they ask you, like Jeff would look at me, and I've got to know Jeff a little bit. Hey, Mac, how you doing? And I would feel comfortable saying, I'm shit today, man. I'm struggling. And I would tell you 50% of the time what happens is he would look at me and say, I'm glad you said that, because I'm shit today too. And then you sit down and you have a conversation that neither one of you knew that you were going to have.
Right.
Both of you need to have. And the thing that triggers it is somebody having the courage to be honest. And when you tell the truth about yourself, you give other people permission to tell the truth about themselves. And that's why I tell people, don't be afraid to tell the truth, and if you're unsure, tell 25% of the truth and watch what happens. Right. And then as you feel more comfortable, and as Jeff said, right, the more I tell the truth about me. I mean, when I first started, I didn't talk about my sister that froze to death. I didn't talk about my father. There's a whole series of things that when I started speaking, I wasn't comfortable talking about it. But I would tell you now that I share those things, and ultimately it's selfish, because I know what I'm going to get back and how important it is for me to sustaining, right, the life that I live, right? The way I've given meaning to my suffering, as Viktor Frankl says in Man's Search for Meaning, is through helping people. And part of helping them is being honest and having the courage. And that's why I say, when somebody says, for being so vulnerable people don't stand up in front of other people and talk about their shit. Courageous people do. And I think we need to rephrase that. Thank you for having the courage, right, to stand up in front of all of us and talk about the personal parts of your life. And I always tell people, I'll tell people that, I'll tell leaders that in particular, you've got to use the pronouns I and me. And they're like, oh, geez, I don't know if I want to tell. I just saw a guy stand up and say, my stepfather used to beat the shit out of me when I was a kid. But really one of the hardest days of my life. And these are Marines, right? These are things Marines say. Two different guys. One a general. The hardest day of my life, I've had 100 Marines under my command killed in combat. Was the day I found out that my 4-year-old daughter was diagnosed as mentally retarded. Standing up there with his voice cracking.
I heard that one, and he was on. And I was destroyed after that.
Right.
That was
and you hear these things and hear these guys, and you have them in this stereo box, but that's not what affects them so deeply, right? And another one said, and this guy a month ago introduced it and said, but one of the hardest days of my life was the day my dad told me that he was going to prison. And you're sitting there, people watching him, and everybody's afraid of, what are they going to think of me? And what happens? All you do is get more access to people as you tell the truth about you. You give them permission to tell the truth about them. And so again, I think we all struggle with, should I really tell them the truth? And watch what happens when you do. And again, you could start with 25%. You could start with 50%, what you're comfortable with.
I told you my first couple after the meeting was over, just a one-on-one. And then the next time we had a group, I decided to tell it. And
I encouraged him. I said, are you going to tell it or am I?
A little peer pressure.
Well, but Jeff was always such a great sport. you know, and he and I have always had this rapport. But I also knew where I was dragging him. I was dragging him to a better place. And if he wasn't going to go there willingly, I would not afraid to drag his ass there.
Yeah,
And
I'm
then,
glad you did.
well, but it was inspirational for other people. And the effect that your example had on other people was profound.
Yeah, but their example is what got me to feel confident to do it. So,
Right.
what are the start dates again?
Next Tuesday and Wednesday. I think it's October 4th and 5th. I should have my
Yeah,
calendar
the
up.
4th is a Tuesday. I know that.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's the 4th and the 5th.
I don't have this below, and I'll put this stuff up, and this video will be available to watch anytime. I'll have this right out. You can DM me on the Facebook groups, or get a hold of Peggy. Anyone of those that know her, with any
Peggy
questions.
Cooney.
Peggy, she's the best. But what is if they want to email you with questions?
Yeah, Mac at posttraumaticwinning.com.
Mac at posttraumatic. Okay. And I'll put that in.
And everything connected to the website, posttraumaticwinning.com, all comes to my cell phone, right? There is nobody else. It comes to me. So you're not going to talk to anybody else. You'll only talk to me.
I got this real catchy tune. It's the theme to Welcome Back, Kotter, but I don't even feel like playing. No, you know what? It's tradition, so screw it. We gotta. This is one of those. That's the age thing. If you're, don't roll your eyes like you don't know. Welcome. Oh God.
Seriously.
You got to end on a note and cause more trauma.
This is your outro? This is your normal?
Welcome Back, Kotter. Well, it wasn't till tonight, until you just ruined it. So now I'll be in the chorus going.
I thought you were a music guy, though. Aren't you a music guy?
I played the trombone in my day.
Did you?
So I'll be sharing that the trauma I had none until I had Mac on the show, and now I've got trauma because
no, this is a parallel track of your life. You bury it, and for whatever reason, I seem to be the trauma excavator in your life for whatever reason. The trombone.
I rocked the trombone. I played football in the fall, and in the spring, I was in the pep band.
Football, I got it right. Girls like football players. Girls don't like trombone players. They like guitar players and drummers. Like, why would you ever take up the trombone?
It was actually a family instrument, but yeah.
Oh my God! No wonder you have so much trauma in your life.
There is trauma because I wish I played the flute or the harmonica, carrying that thing around all the time. It was lugging that around, but yeah, it was. Anyways, that's a whole nother. You got to join the class to hear me open up about
the case and the stigma associated with carrying the case.
Yeah. Anyways,
but you went to a very swanky private school. Like, who teased you there?
Wait, what's that? What about it?
You went to a very swanky private school. Yeah.
JJJSUUUIT. Yeah. You know, when we played Christian Brothers, our chant was, because it was the two Catholic schools in Sacramento, Jesus went to Jesuit. Jesus went to Jesuit. So that was our big chant when we played Christian Brothers. So I'm going to have all those reunions in about 2 weeks with my mighty Marauder brothers. So, and look at the numbers. Everyone's bailing on the meeting going, I'm out of here. I couldn't care less about his trombone days. Mac, thank you so much. And I got to see, I think Wednesdays I can be involved. I'd love to do that. I got so much out of it. So great stuff. And we will have, I'll be back on Thursday night with Peggy, and we'll keep going. But thanks, Mac. You're the best.
No.
Stay on.
All right.
Take care. See you, buddy.
Thank you.
See you, everyone.